Hello, everyone. Good evening, good afternoon, depends on where you're joining us from. Welcome to the March 2025 edition of Talking Books Africa. We're so glad you've joined us. We have an exciting author and book today. So please let us know where you're joining us from. This is Talking Books Africa. It's brought to you by the Rainbow Book Club, project manager at Port Harcourt World Book Capital 2014. I can see the author Wanjiru is here with us. Hi, Wanjiru.
Hello, everyone.
Yeah. Oh, and you have a lovely copy of the book there, all the way from
I would show
Nairobi.
you.
Are you joining us from Nairobi?
I am. I am joining you from Nairobi. Very grateful because we had a power cut until 3 minutes ago. So this
Oh,
call is ordained officially.
I love that. Hallelujah.
Yeah,
We're so happy because we understand power cuts in Nigeria.
absolutely. I know you
Yeah.
do.
Welcome, welcome. We're glad you're joining us. We want to introduce our book of the month. So, Mobi, I think you can show us the book of the month. Anyway, it's right here behind the author, The Havoc of Choice. And someone has described it as a gripping tale of political turmoil and personal betrayal in the wake of Kenya's 2007 election. So I hope our audience have had an opportunity to get a copy of the book, read it, so we can engage with the author. And talking about the author, Wanjiru Koinange is from Kenya. Wanjiru, what part of Kenya are you from?
I am from Nairobi, born and bred in
Okay,
Nairobi.
fantastic, fantastic. I've been to Nairobi a few times, so I'm so excited
Yeah.
for that reason. So Wanjiru is a book lover, of course. She's a restorer of libraries. She's a writer herself. And something interesting about Wanjiru, she plants trees for every copy of her book sold. I found that little detail quite interesting. And it reminds me of Wangari Maathai, the Kenyan activist who got the Nobel Prize for Peace, right?
Yes, absolutely, absolutely. The land is very close to my heart. It's funny you should bring that up because just today I was thinking, I have to do the numbers for last year and because I like to do it once a year. So I haven't done last year's books, but it's still early in the year.
Okay, okay, but that's really a commendable thing to do. Well done. So
Thank you.
without much ado, I'll hand you over to our interviewer for today. Her name is Dabi. Dabi is a lawyer. She works in private equity in London, advising high-profile clients on investments. She achieved a first class in law from Cambridge University, and she loves to read and write, and she shares her thoughts on, literature, her love for literature on her bookstagram. So over to you, Dabi.
Thank you so much, Mrs. K, for the very warm introduction. And thank you so much, Wanjiru, for being with us and also on behalf of the planet for single-handedly saving us, I think, from global warming with the planting of trees. That is incredible. I I have a copy of the book right here, and I'm so excited to get into it. It has been my companion. I was saying to Mrs. K just before this, we were talking about the book and my thoughts, and I was saying I had to like pace myself because I knew that we were chatting today, and I wanted to make sure I hadn't read it too far in advance. So it was like giving myself like a chapter or two a day, little crumbs, so I wouldn't go fly through it so quickly. But honestly, the fact that I wanted to is just a testament to your writing and your brilliance, but we will definitely get more into it as we go on. So I think what I wanted to start with was even just the first page, the cover, the title. You have aptly titled this book, The Havoc of Choice, which I think makes sense to me and becomes interesting and clear as you read the book. But I was wondering, in your own words, kind of why you thought of giving it that title, where it came from, what was the inspiration?
That's a great place to start. And thank you for the invitation and for all of your kind words about the book and about the the trees, which is my own little. I feel really guilty that the book that trees had to die for the book to live, which is my way of kind of giving it back. But the title. So the title, I wish I could take full credit for. And as you will notice, the book is dedicated to a friend of mine called Christine. Christine is a friend of mine who passed away before the book came out. She and I went to grad school together, and we were both working on our manuscripts. And this book was a product of, or was a thesis project for a master's in creative writing. And we were in the same class, and we both finished our manuscripts. And I didn't know what to call my book. At that point, it was called Sunday Lunch because the story begins, and I don't know how much spoilers I'm going to give by mistake, but it begins on Sunday during lunch and ends on Sunday during lunch. And that's the only title I had, but it wasn't good enough. And she told me that when she's stuck, she reads poetry. So I went to a house, we had some gin and tonics, and we read poetry. And this beautiful poem I read, and I wish I could go back to her home now and grab the book and take a photograph of the poem because I didn't. But a man was looking up on his town. He was standing on a hill looking up on looking down on his town, and they'd just been through war, and he couldn't recognize his town, and he was lamenting about the havoc and the spoil that he was witnessing. And I love that line, the havoc and the spoil. But I also knew I wanted the word choice in this book because this is a book about choices and what happens when you have them, when you don't, when you make them, when you don't. And so between those two sentiments, by the end of the afternoon, the title, The Havoc of Choice, was born. So I could take credit for half of it, but Christine and just the beautiful setting and the space she put me in so we could read poetry and think about it. That's how the name was born. And then the cover. The cover, the one you're holding was a first ever edition that was published in the UK. And probably got it on Amazon. The one behind me was published here in East Africa. The cover is a bit more special to me, this one, because my sister designed it. My sister's a graphic designer. And I was sitting in her house once the book was finished. I was stressed, it was coming out. And I told her, of course you're doing the cover, just do the thing, just put something together. And she's like, I need more of a brief than that. And I told her I want the cover to feel like home. And she's like, I need more. And when I think of home, when I think of Kenya, when I think of Nairobi, I think of sunshine, I think of the beach, and I think of forest. And that's why the color palette is what it is. So the yellow, the green, and the blue.
Okay.
And the flower is derived from my mother's kanga. A kanga is like a fabric that most women will own when they're 18 here in East Africa. And the print that you see on the cover was derived from my mother's version of that kanga. So this cover is really special to me. I love them all, but I definitely have a favorite.
Dang it. Now I wish I got that one. I'm like,
no,
oh no.
they're all really special.
No, they're beautiful. I mean, I did, when I Googled the book as well, I did see the various covers and I thought, wow, how gorgeous. And I was wondering about the flowers because I think that's something the two of them do have in common. So that makes sense. I'm very sorry for your loss. And I think, just in general with the book, it seems even the book itself is born in some ways out of loss, right? The elections and kind of the backdrop of it all. And I guess some people will have read it or looked it up, but for people who don't know, it's kind of set during the 2007 elections. It follows a fictional family, and basically the father within that family decides to go into politics. And obviously at this very kind of divisive time, it just follows that path and the I guess the havoc of the choice that he makes, but also the choice that wider political leaders and so on make and how that affects the common person. So yeah, no, yes, I found that very interesting. Also, how you came to the name, it's interesting when you say the havoc and obviously the poem, because I know there's, for example, quotes about, I funny enough was just reading somewhere about this quote that's like, choosing not to make a choice is a choice in itself. So I was wondering if you had seen that, and so that's really interesting. Okay, helpful. And so I wanted to move on and kind of get more into what we've alluded to, which is the elections and your reason, I guess, for writing a book that is set in that time period. So on your website, for example, and I will read, you note that your goal and your work in life is kind of focused around inspiring people through art and literature and so on to think about change. And so I wondered, could you talk a bit about how this book, specifically the subject matter it looks at and the setting and so on, fits into this wider goal that you have?
Sure. So all of my life, all of my working life, my adult life, I've always been fascinated by creativity and creative expression, but more so the kind of creative expression that inspires people to do things. So anything that I have done in my life to kind of change something, to move something, or even to attempt to, has probably began when I watched something, when I heard something, when I read something. So art is as close to me as family, honestly. And in 2007 specifically, I was working in the music industry for a very socially conscious musician who used his work to advocate for all manner of social change. And I think that's where the seed was planted, because I wasn't doing it with my craft at the time, but I was surrounded by people who were. And for this election specifically, I was in my early 20s in 2007, and it was my first or maybe second time ever voting, and I was working that election, specifically working to get the youth to vote, because until then in Kenya, the youth turnout had been pitiful, and like most African countries, we're the majority, or I'm no longer youth, we were the majority. Um, but we just weren't coming out to vote, and I understood why it was so important. I had this innate sense that it's the only way to change things. But it was really exciting to be able to go around the country and get the young people to vote, and they did. But then 07 happened, the violence happened, and none of us saw that coming. And we were all kind of sitting, holding our jaws in our hands, being like, "This isn't Kenya." We weren't used to Kenya looking the way it did for those 2 weeks. You could see those images coming from other places, from our neighbors, from Somalia and South Sudan and all of these, Sudan and all of these places, but never Kenya. And we sat on our high horse for a long time, being like, it can never be us. But then it was. And it happened so quickly. It felt so spontaneous. I remember it like it was 2 years ago. But what struck me the most is how quickly we moved on from it. It was 10 days to 2 weeks of the worst violence we'd experienced, maybe even longer in some places, because some places it started earlier and went on longer. And then there was just like a return to normal, like people hadn't died, like people hadn't lost their livelihoods and been completely betrayed by their neighbors and their country and their politicians and their leaders. It was too quick. It was too quick. I had whiplash from how we got over it. And I'm not saying that I wanted us to wallow in grief for months and months. I think just an acknowledgement of loss and a loss of identity specifically that we still haven't dealt with. And that's why I wrote this book. It took me leaving Kenya to go and study writing, to go and when I lost my father, I went to study writing, and it's only because South Africans who had very recently, in the grand scheme of things, also suffered their own loss, and they were like, "You guys can't be okay. Kenya can't be okay." Because South Africans ask me, "How are you doing as Kenyans?" And I'm like, "We're fine," because I drank the Kool-Aid. But the more I got the question, the more I questioned myself, and I'm a trained journalist, so I went back into the records and but what it was like, and I'm like, the started. It was my way of just coming to terms with who Kenyans are now.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That's incredible. And I also think it's kind of, as you say, memorializing it in some ways, recognizing the fact that this did happen. I'm going to lend my voice and my literature to kind of remember the people whose lives were taken or whose lives were irredeemably changed by this violence, and acknowledging that it happened. Yes, we could have moved on, and that's great. Don't want to wallow and, as you say, have a civil war that spans 10 years, 20 years, but at the same time knowing that it happened, because how can you change the future if you don't look back at history?
Absolutely.
No, that makes sense. And I guess so, going now into the characters, because there's a whole kind of cast of people, and I was very fascinated about how you wrote this and did it, because obviously we start off with the main family. It's a traditional nuclear family unit: mom, dad, brother, sister. And then we span out, we start thinking about the domestic help within the situation, which is so apt for Africa, the drivers, the house helps, the extended family, and how they all weave into the story. So I wanted to ask you if you could talk a bit about the characters in your book and how you came about refining them and bringing them to life. Because what struck me was even the most minor characters, like I would think of Kiprop, for example, the police officer who is with Thuo for that kind of, I can't even, maybe 36, 72 hour period in the book, is so prominent in my mind, almost the same way as someone like Ngugi or Chapto or Thuo. So how did you think about your characters, creating them, and also giving them this life?
Thank you. That's a huge compliment, and probably one of the things that I worked on the most. I really wanted every single person you encountered to be full, to even if they only existed in one page, that experience with them was so rich that
Mm-hmm.
that it remained with you. And that's just also the way that interactions with I think Kenyans, but most Africans are. You won't remember someone's name or where they're from, but you remember how they made you feel. You remember how they spoke. You remember what language they spoke to you, because even if we all come from one tribe, we all kind of pick up all the other languages. At least here in Kenya, you
Yeah.
kind of at any time are speaking 3 or 4 different languages.
Yeah.
So the characters, really wanted them to be rich, and the way that I was able to achieve that is, this book took 8 years and 8 drafts to write.
Wow.
So we had very many formats before this one, including some that were nonfiction.
Oh,
But one
wow.
of the formats, and one that I hope I can go back to later in my writing career, is it was a series of short stories about each of these characters, and the story began and ended before you only kind of were immersed in this person's life, in Gugi's life, in Chepto's life, in Thuo's life, but not so much in other people's. And we didn't really know how they were connected. And the goal was then at the end to connect them. But I kept leaving crumbs in the story that would tell you, and I just couldn't figure it out, and I didn't have enough time. Even with 8 years, I didn't have enough time. And that's why I really believe that you have to grow as a writer. You have to start as basic as you can, and then experiment with form a bit more. So in a sense, Chepto had an entire story of herself, and there were like many novellas. The it was massive in the early drafts, and each of them were kind of fully formed. Some of the characters and some of the characters who I hear readers describe as supporting or like minor characters, for me, is a book of like a 5-person ensemble cast,
Yeah.
but some are more prominent than others. But those ones like Ngugi, like Chepto, I've known them since I was 19. I've written them for so long. I've known them intimately. And I think because they were just the ones who are farthest from my reality as a domestic help, they were the ones that I was the most curious about. So I really invested in making sure that they didn't begin and end with what they did for their money, and that you could really understand their motivations and their challenges, and really get to see them beyond these things of the world, and get to know their hearts more than anything.
Yeah, that makes
Yeah.
sense. I mean, but I can imagine very difficult because as you said, like, for readers who may not have gotten to this part or may not know, Thuo is a driver in the story who kind of kicks off the whole thing because his his madame, I should call her, kind of gets on a flight and kind of disappears at the very beginning of the book. And a lot of how we're introduced to the whole storyline is Thuo basically being thought of as having kidnapped her, for example, classic driver, and his wife, Chapto, as well. So they're kind of side characters or domestic help to the family. But as Wanjiru said, they take up a lot of space and a lot of thought, I think, in the reader's mind, because when you read the book as well, you'll see, for those who haven't had the chance yet, they really drive the story forward. And towards the end of the book, I think, war and violence, I thought it was very interesting as well how classism affects how we experience pain and war and so on, because in some ways everyone is scarred by the end of this, and that's one of the most harrowing things. But you can see for some people it's different than others. You can see the role that money plays in protecting, and also the extent to which money stops protecting you. At the end of the day, money cannot protect you from death.
Absolutely. And that's why it was so important for me to also that everybody suffered in this book, nobody was left unscathed, and
Everybody did
really
suffer.
yeah, I'm just like everyone. There's gonna be no one is
You
left
said
unscathed.
violence for everybody is we're
So
all
that's
gonna
what it
experience
was.
it.
And here it was the degree was different, right? There was nobody who was an inconvenience. For some people, you couldn't go to the liquor store because they were closed or because they were raided. For other
Yeah.
people, you couldn't go to your home. So
Yeah.
the scale was different.
Mm.
And for some characters, like such as Kavata, I knew that if I left her in Nairobi, if she was at home when the violence happened, then she should have been too protected
Mm.
and maybe have remained unscathed, which is
Mhm.
why it was important for her to be as far away from her sphere of influence as possible, and for
Mm.
other reasons as well. But yeah, it was such an interesting time, and it made me really think about our past, because I wasn't around obviously during the fight for independence, and I
Yeah.
keep thinking sometimes that, oh my God, things were so bad in
Yeah.
'07, like that was the worst we've ever been. We're having some really tough economic times. I'm just like, this is the worst it's ever been. Then I think about what it was like for our parents
Yeah.
to be in the sticks and to just be witnessing colonization. I'm just like, okay, let's dial it back. Let's
Yeah.
maybe things have been worse.
Yeah.
But it really helps to just kind of try and look at your experience on a spectrum. And I think the characters and having them being so different but so connected was my way of exploring that.
Yeah. No, that's brilliant. I mean, it's kind of a related point actually, because we've chatted about how you knew some characters, for example, from as young as 19 and so on. But I'd written in my notes that, there's a lot of tension between so many of the characters. Kavasa and Ngugi come to mind, for example. We're dealing with the dynamic of a husband and wife trying to work through their marriage, as well as being thrust into the political scene. And obviously Kavasa having such strong feelings about that from her background. But in general, we witness a lot of character tension, and that's also what kind of pushes the book forward. Many of the authors that we've had the pleasure of interviewing on this platform have mentioned how their characters take on lives of their own. You think of an author as being the puppet master guiding their little puppets, but we've had authors come here and tell you, no, 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 like my characters tell me what they want to do, and I feel like I just have to let them kind of roll with it. So I was wondering, do you have that experience, or did you, when writing these characters? And were there times where you were writing it, but you were thinking to yourself, man, like if I was in the book, or if Kavata was real and she was my friend, I'd be like, sis, don't do this. Like, don't do what you're doing. Like, I wondered if you had any moments like that.
Yeah, I used to really roll my eyes when writers would say that before I finished this book. I'd be like, these guys just make this writing thing sound so ethereal, and just like spiritual. It's work. It's sitting at your desk and you're writing
Mm,
until it happened. And it doesn't always happen. It
mm,
happens maybe for me at least a quarter of the time that you're writing them. When that magic happens, you can feel the characters take over. So yes, it does
mm,
happen. For me, it happened most with the characters that I was the most different from, and the ones with whom I disagreed with the most, because
mm,
I think the reason why I will always write is because it forces you to dig into the 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 roots of the people who you just cannot stand. I've spent a lot of time reading around about really terrible people, because you have to find the humanity in them so you can write about them. So people in the book who did terrible things, or the politicians who just were refusing to let this thing run like it should, even
mm,
if as the writer despise them, I really had to get to the core of them.
mm,
And those are the ones who kind of just took over and did their thing, because I could never conjure up some of the things that they did or said or behaved. I think for me, it was also really important to humanize the police force with this,
mm.
because I'm terrified of policemen, even till today.
Yeah.
And that was my way of trying to kind of attach my fear a little bit, because there's very many reasons to be afraid of the police. I think in many countries,
Mm,
but there's also very many good policemen out there who have been broken by the way that the training is done, and by the
yeah.
lack of thing around policing. And when I just did a little bit of research around how policing happens in Kenya, how training happens, I was just like,
Mm,
okay, how are you then supposed to be like kind and gentle when you're on
yeah.
this with people and you're trained to treat everyone like a criminal? And I'm like, what
Yeah.
what what is the outcome here? So for me, it was really important to let the people who I don't understand have their own voice.
Mm,
It didn't always happen. Sometimes I really had to just read reports and read first person accounts.
mm.
Yeah.
Well, yeah, I mean, it's funny, you mentioned the police, and I think for me that was also one of the really harrowing bits. So Thuo, the driver, spends majority of this book, I think, in a cell, and the way you describe the cell, like the condition of it, how dirty, how mucky, and the fact that we are putting human beings in those spaces, and then we have Kiprop, who there were few police officers who he met during his time there, but Kiprop really stood out to me exactly because of what you mentioned, how you describe there's a bit in the book where Kirk describes how he was trained to become a police officer, and it's closer to torture. I don't even think that we should do that to captives of opposing armies, talk less of people that were training to go out on the streets and defend people, so yeah, wow. And just again, I'm just like, really well done. Like, my mind is like so I wanted to talk a bit more about the election and the role it plays. I think when I was reading this, it almost, especially towards the end where we start getting into the violence and the attitudes around the results, it almost feels like the election is not just a backdrop to the characters' lives, but almost as a character in and of itself in the way that it's presented. And so I was wondering, what was your process in researching and writing? We've touched on it a little bit. You said you read reports and so on, but researching and writing the more kind of political and then sliding into violent aspects, especially of the last kind of 100 pages where we have just so much bloodshed and so much violence, like how was that researching? How was that starting to write all of that?
I don't think I ever would have written this book if I was living in Kenya when I was writing it. I was in Cape Town at the time in South Africa for my master's program. That distance was so important. It almost allowed me to look at this as an outsider, even if I was here during the violence. So to give you a sense of timeline, so I went to grad school in 2012. The violence was 2007. So we were just on, and I think because of violence was in 2007, the next election was delayed because there was no election, there was no electoral commission. So we just had to rebuild some structures. So the next election happened while I was away, and it's the first and only one that I have missed. And I was very happy to do so. So I think the 5 years since allowed me to also, and because for those 5 years I lived in Kenya, it allowed me to really immerse myself in whatever artistic production had happened around the violence. And there was a lot, because the wonderful thing about living in Kenya is that artists kind of, we all know when it's time to stand up and document, and there's a lot of documenting of the violence, and especially through photography. I think there wasn't any long form writing. It was just too soon. I think there has been a lot since, and there will be continued. But there's a lot of reporting, a lot of creative nonfiction, a lot of photography. And I went to as much as I could find about the violence, because we were all looking for ways to make sense of this. And then we kind of just went on with our lives eventually. Eventually, we're just like, let's just accept it, move on like we've been told to. So when it came time to then start writing the book, when South Africans and being in Cape Town and being around Black South Africans had really triggered this question again, I went back to it as a journalist. I didn't really need to ask for any first-person accounts, because I didn't want to pick at any wounds at the expense of people's emotions. And there was so much out there already. And it was also, 2007 was just at the time in Kenya when TV channels were putting the news on YouTube. It had just started. So thankfully, there was some stuff online, because there was certain characters like the chairman of the Electoral Commission, who I remember so vividly from 2007. And I remember even some of the speeches that he gave verbatim. And I don't even know why, because I'm not even, I wasn't that person then, but it just tells you how much of this news you were consuming at the time.
Yeah.
I wanted to remember him saying, so I can put them in a character's mouth. There were, and that was what I spent a lot of time in libraries in Cape Town doing, just going through the internet, finding newspaper clippings, so many witness accounts now. There were so many witness accounts. And one of the saddest thing about the UCT library burning is I've always wondered if I could still access the little treasure trove of information I had kept aside for this book. But it was a little bit of everything. I read a lot of Kwani journals that were published around the 2007 violence.
Right.
And then I just kind of like, I don't know, instinctively or intuitively placed an experience I had read about, because almost everything I speak about actually happened. And I kind of matched them with characters. I'm like, and the whole experience of the train actually happened. The train was the only way at some point to get across Uganda and Kenya. The burning of the church actually happened. And those were things, I'm just like, these are the things Kenyans, we've got to reconcile these things, because people died in terrible ways.
Horrible.
I just had to decide what character it made sense to put next to what experience based on what tribe they were and where
Yeah.
they were likely to have been because
Yeah.
of the Kenyans vote. We all traveled to the place we are in to vote. I just said I'm from Nairobi. I'm not really from Nairobi because no one's from
Mm.
Nairobi. I go to the place my grandmother is from to
I get
vote.
that. Yeah.
Yeah. And that's how we vote. That's why when elections happen and violence happens, we were scattered. We were
Yeah.
all up country, and
Yeah.
we all have to find our own way home. And that process just tells you so much about Kenya.
Mm. Yeah, no, that makes sense. And I think even, we touched on the situation in Kenya, but I think one of the things that was very harrowing to me, maybe because it's also something that I can, God forbid, we pray never to relate or experience something like that ever again. But it's towards the end of the book, you had a character who met Kavasa because he lived in the US. And they have this really interesting moment where they bond in like a fast food chain or a food court or something, you forgive me, and discuss what's happening, like the violence. And obviously we then know what happens with him. He's torn in this place between his whole family thinks because he's in America, he has all this money to rescue them or even to fly back. And, he doesn't. And it's heartbreaking what happens at the end. So even with that, like, how is that like also trying to figure out and even think widely about, okay, not just in Kenya, but also Kenyans in the diaspora who may not be physically harmed, but are dealing with so much emotion and knowing your mom and your dad are in a house that's currently being burnt down or they're, like, what about that as well?
Yeah. I have lots of family who live abroad. I have a sister now who presently lives abroad. My mom at some point lived abroad.
Mm-hmm.
And because also I spent it's only 4 years, but I spent 4 years living in South Africa. That's not
Yeah.
even abroad by the grand scheme of things, but it's far. It's far
Abroad.
from
Yeah.
moments when I hated being away from home is the moments when there was some kind of trouble going home. Because
Yeah.
if Kenya is burning, let me be with my people. I want to be at home. I don't
Yeah.
want to be outside. I'm like, this is where and unless I'm outside with all of my people, and that's
Yeah.
impossible. I don't know if everyone can come, right?
Yeah.
And I think that's what I really wanted to bring in. I really wanted to talk about this shininess we've attached to bring away.
Mm.
Um, because I try to go to the US specifically for undergrad, and I'm just like, no, this life of distance and really struggling for community.
Mm.
I think that it's definitely has its benefits, and those people who do it for a reason.
Yeah.
But you have the choice, and I had the choice. I luck that I can come home and choose how to
Yeah.
interact with these places, because to be somewhere where the pressures of the family are bigger, the
Mhm.
black tax is higher because you live somewhere where your expense, your cost of living is also higher, and you can't
Yeah.
really say that. If you
Yeah.
can't, there's no way, because I have been on the other end of being like, you live in the States, send me some $20, that will be
Yeah.
able to sustain me for like a month.
Yeah.
Sometimes there's an entitlement to it that I think is unfair, and I think that sometimes those who are living in the diaspora they can't say it. But I'm
Yeah.
just like, let me have a character who can, in a very short span of a couple of pages, really talk to this pressure of being outside, of watching your country burn, of worrying, of missing the good things, but also the bad things.
Yeah.
I think he
The,
talks about sending his nephew or a family member off to on vacation. He's like, I haven't
exactly.
vacationed in
Yeah.
years.
In
I
here.
haven't been since I moved to the US, and I'm paying for vacations for people at home.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. I completely agree. That aspect, and then also kind of the pain of being a survivor, the pain of being supposedly safe. But what is safety when everyone you love is unsafe? Like, yeah, I mean, yes. Okay. And then I guess another aspect of the book is, we talk about the men and they seem to be driving the plot, driving the action, and Gugi's running for, he's a politician, he's getting into that. Muli as well as a politician, though even himself as a side character pushes the novel along because he's the first person to get in trouble and then spark the question of where's Kavasa and why did she run away and so on. But perhaps biased because I am a woman, but I also wanted to talk about the role of the women in the book, who I would argue are actually in reality the people really doing the driving, in their own ways. And I wanted to ask, what were you trying to show, especially about the role of women and how they kind of suffer or deal with these politically charged and fraught situations with these characters, but also with the plot lines. You know, I'm thinking about Wanja joining a political party that opposes her dad seems to be just teen rebellion, but then there's so much more that goes into that. Like, what were you thinking as well about these characters and about women in general in your book?
You're asking some excellent questions, Victoria.
Yeah, I'm trying.
It's been a very long time since I did any kind of like book engagement. So I'm really enjoying this conversation. I think I wanted to just make sure I can say that. I say that
I'm
first.
glad. Thank you. It's great to meet you as well. I'm fangirling, but yes, please go on.
So the reality of my life is that yes, the patriarchy is real 5 days out of 7, right? And it's something that I think I have witnessed, I live through, but what I enjoy, well, I don't enjoy the patriarchy, but the thing that I enjoy about it is watching women navigate it in this like completely like almost natural way. Like we know when to be loud and when to, in fact, we're almost never loud. You know how to exercise your soft power. And
Yeah.
that's true of the women in the book. They don't repeat themselves. They don't say things twice, right? In fact, I've now categorized my readers into there's those people who love Kavata and those who hate her. And it's so clear. It's so because a lot of the people who can't stand her,
Mm,
first of all, mothers of young children. And I'm not a mother, so I think that's the only reason why I could write this.
yeah.
Mothers, and it's also just women who I don't know. It's mostly, to be honest, it's honestly mothers.
Mm,
And for me, Kavata is one of the most consistent people in the book because she does what she said. She said, if you do this, I will do this. And she said it
yeah.
once, and she didn't
Yeah.
really to like shout or be brash and even if she's the one who is set up with the power in the beginning, because she does come from a family that is political, she has done this dance before. She completely
Yeah.
understands that if you were not married to me, we wouldn't live in this house. We wouldn't have the kind of access
Mm,
that we have. But
mm,
she doesn't need to flaunt any of that. Her father does that very
mm,
loud. And she just says her thing and then she does it, right?
yeah.
Same Wanja. She doesn't really have to like the most her biggest protest was doing the most, I think, elegant thing she could do, which
Mm-hmm.
is to work for the party that she thought was running a stronger campaign for her father. It wasn't
Mm-hmm.
about, it was really about maybe a little deceit, but really just about this guy that as they have more money, they're slicker. I wanna have a better experience. I'm gonna go and work for my dad's opposition.
Yeah.
I think even with Chateau, even with all of the ways that she drove for the right thing to happen, she drove for Thuo to do the right thing, to use his voice when he couldn't. I
Yeah.
think a way of me saying that while we have a long way to go before we abolish the patriarchy, we also need to acknowledge that women are every day just finding elegant ways to navigate it and get things done. Because in my Nairobi, it's women running everything. Yes, we have a male president. Yes, we have a lot of men in office often ruining things. But if you really look at the things that are working in Nairobi, really the things that have heart and a longevity, they're run by women. And
Yeah.
no one's shouting we're just doing our thing and being quiet about it and making sure that the work is happening.
Yeah.
And that's the reason why I think there's hope, because my nieces are watching us do this thing, and in the same way that I watched my mother do it and she watched her mother, and I think that gives me a lot more hope about this continent than many other places, because
Mm-hmm.
we're kind of abolishing it in our own subtle way. And the
Mm-hmm.
women in the book are, for me, microcosms of that.
Mm-hmm. That's
Yeah.
brilliant. Now that you say that, I'm thinking about it and I'm like, actually, 100%, all of these women stood on business. They said, I'm doing this and they did
Yeah.
it, or I'm not doing this and they didn't do it. But I think it's also interesting what you say about how various people have various views on Kavasa. I am probably in the camp of someone who sees her the way you've just described. She said she was going to do something and she did it. But when you said mothers would probably be the ones who are anti-Kavasa, I am now thinking about it, and I'm thinking about, if I had a conversation with my mom about this, she would be like, "How could she do that?" You know, like, because I get it, because it's interesting. That's yeah, but
It's
yes, okay,
difficult. It's difficult what she did. And there's so many other ways she could have done that. She could have taken her kids with her. And those are the things that I think, that's why I'm just like, she said, she didn't say I'll leave, or we will leave you. She's like,
yeah.
I will do
Me
it.
personally, I'm not sticking around. Yeah,
Yeah. very clear about he's a terrible husband, but is he a good father?
Yeah,
Um, and I think that's why I think that, I mean, she may have her issues. All of my characters have issues, but
100%.
she's one of the people who I really admire, because I don't know if I would do the same thing in her position, to be honest. If I had
I know.
children, I don't
Yeah.
know if I could.
It is, there is a strength of character in being able to say, I'm going to do this, and regardless of the outcomes, like, I'm going to do it. Although I will say, to her credit, she didn't know, without giving the spoilers away, what we know she didn't know
Yeah,
at the time. And
absolutely.
there's a question of if she would have gone ahead and stood on business, as we've said, if she knew that the outcome would be as dark as it was at the end. um
Absolutely.
and so I'm very conscious of time, because I know we've had a lot of people in the chat box, and I'm supposed to give the audience a few minutes to ask questions. But I also wanted to get into kind of you as a person and just ask you a couple of questions, and then I will hand it over to the audience. So your bio at the book notes that you were at the back of the book, rather, notes that you were born and raised on a farm on the outskirts of Nairobi. So I thought that was really interesting, and I wondered if you could talk to us a bit about your childhood growing up, and I guess how that's also influenced who you are today, and obviously becoming a writer, and your focus on change, everything we've kind of talked about in this conversation.
Hmm. Sure. So yes, I come from a really big family. I'm the last born of 5 children.
Mm.
We're all so close. In fact, this week was really tough because my sister used to live right next door to me, and she moved away this week just because
Oh.
Nairobi is getting smaller. Um, so I'm very, very, very big, close-knit family.
Mm.
And the farm we lived on is now considered Nairobi, but then it wasn't. You know how borders can shift based on roads and things. So
Indeed.
it was really maybe about 20 minutes away from here, and
Mm.
it was a beautiful flower and coffee farm that my family
Oh.
owned, and no longer owns fully. And it's just it was wonderful because we didn't have neighbors, so you just had to find ways to entertain yourself. And for my mother, who loved to read, it meant that we had to read. And if you're not reading, you were doing something with your hands or your brain. There was obviously
Mm.
um there was no one else to play with. It was my siblings, my cousins, who are a bit of a way away.
Mm.
And that's kind of where, like, my love for reading came. It came from trying to discover other worlds. Of course, I didn't have as many options as I wish I did to read, and
Mm.
that's a question about the production of literature here in Kenya, and a story for another day.
Mm.
Um, but then, yeah, then was we came to school here in Nairobi, did everything in Nairobi until my master's. So I've really been educated here. I'm a product of the Kenyan education system. But in grad school, I was ready for something different,
Mm.
and after I went to South Africa. South
Mhm.
Africa is a place where I really like. I've always known the things that I care about, but the distance from home in South Africa gave me time to really solidify it and focus
Yeah.
on my writing more than anything, but
Mhm.
also to focus on or it made me discover this love for libraries that I've always really had, but not known how to articulate, and
Mm.
have now since articulated via the work that we do at Book Bank, which
Mhm.
takes up all the time that I should be spending writing, but that's just for now. Um, and outside of that, I love to be outdoors. I love plants. I love trees. I love to be on the beach. I love water. Like to spend time with my dog, our dog. My sister and I share a dog, and she's right here listening
Oh.
today as well.
Hello.
She's right here. Yeah, and that's me. That's me. I think that libraries are beautiful places. I think stories are incredible, and I'm just trying to constantly remind the world how important they are, either
Yeah.
through my telling or through my advocacy work.
Amazing. I actually had a question on here about the work that you do within the community. And one of my questions was going to be, can you talk about kind of literature and books and why they are important to you, what they mean to you? But I feel like you've answered that. So I'm going to use my one more question to ask you something a bit philosophical almost. But we've talked about how your mission is to drive kind of change, thinking about change. But I wondered, internally flipping it back and self-reflecting, what is a life principle or philosophy that you live by? What do you kind of say to yourself to keep pushing and to keep going for your wider goals?
Mm. Wow, that is such a great question. Um, so I think at the core, I'm always trying to be as kind as I can be.
Mm.
even on the days when it's difficult to do so. And when I find that slipping, then I really pause and check in,
Yeah.
and try and tap into that. That's kind of like the thing that I check in on about the most. And also it's important when you're in leadership,
Mhm.
when you're having to tell stories that are not always your stories to tell. I think kindness as a base is a really important thing. It's a
Mhm.
great base for everything else.
Mhm.
I'm very driven by my work ethic.
Mhm.
And this is almost a blessing and a curse, but more so because I really like to finish things, even though that shouldn't be finished sometimes. That should be
Yes.
abandoned, don't always get abandoned. And I think
Mhm.
that there's, for me, the reason why it's so important to finish things is because I don't always they don't always have to be finished in the way that you intended them to in the beginning. I
Mhm.
think it's important to adjust plans. I think it's important to adjust storylines and plot lines and
Mhm.
life plans and goals.
Mhm.
But I also think it's even more important to finish them. And I think if you give yourself room to do both those things, then completion always kind of happens, but it also takes the form that it's supposed to.
Mhm.
Um, and I think finishing things is always a good way to honor the person you are when you started them.
Mm.
So
Mm.
I like, my work ethic is what drives me to always get to a point with projects and things where they are as complete as they can be given the circumstances. And I think that is what drives me every day.
Mhm.
I don't start things very often.
Mm.
Because I know I know that I'm gonna need to finish them, and I
Yeah.
also get bored very quickly. So I'm just like, can I finish it? I do so quickly before I get bored.
Yeah.
Um, it's something that again find myself reflecting upon a lot recently.
Mm. I mean, I feel like this book is evidence of your work ethic and what you've just said. 8 years is, I mean, let's not talk about my failed manuscript. That's like 10K words and I've just abandoned since 2022. It's incredible. I have immense awe for people who start and finish something, especially as deep and as thought through as this, honestly. So
Yeah,
I'm
for me,
gonna
trying to finish it. It didn't matter how long it could have taken 12 years. And I was
Mhm.
just at the point I'm just like, this one is not a quick one. It's gonna have to be a
Mm.
slow one. And that was what for me the compromise was. I'm like, it will come out when it's ready.
Yeah.
And
Amazing. I like to end with a this or that with the author. So I ask you basically two things and you tell me one or the other, and then we'll hand over to audience questions. So rapid fire, you can't think about it, just
okay.
books or TV,
TV, I know.
hot drinks or cold drinks,
Cold drinks,
Monopoly or Scrabble,
Scrabble,
going out or staying in,
staying in,
fiction or nonfiction,
fiction,
sweet or savory,
sweet,
early bird or night owl,
early bird,
rich and famous or rich and unknown.
rich and unknown every day,
Fair, me too. Breakfast or dinner.
dinner
And last one, beach or city break.
or beach.
Okay, awesome. Well, I had a wonderful time talking to you. I'm gonna take a look in our chat function and our Q&A just to see what our audience are asking. So Alicia has said, you said the manuscript took 8 years to make. If I'm not mistaken, in the span of 8 years, I'm sure you had a few setbacks or writer's block. So how did you bypass those things when they came?
That's a great question. My community, this book felt too big for me to be the one writing. I was in my 20s when I started it. It came out just as I think I turned 30. I'm lying, maybe I was older. So imposter syndrome was real. It's a complicated book. I didn't want to piss people off. I want to live in Kenya. So I'm just like, oh my gosh, I'm gonna have to go and live elsewhere because like they're gonna come for me. So it was really that was the reason it took so long. It could have come out earlier if I think that I was a woman then who could stand by this book, it would have come out sooner. But I really think I had to grow up and I had to really stand in some of the things that needed to be said.
Mm.
Um, and then also I was really intentional. I really wanted this book to be published on the African continent first, and it took a long time to kind of let go of that dream and understand that getting published in the UK or elsewhere might unlock opportunities here.
Mhm.
And all of these ideals that I had to get rid of, including like just deciding to there's so many things about production in book and especially in this part of Africa, where I really wish the publishing sector was a lot more developed. But I had to do a lot of compromises around the pricing of the book, the paper, even the paper. I'm like, I have to bring
Wow.
paper in from India. Like, what are we talking about?
Wow.
Those things, while they just added months and weeks to the process, was so important to me. And I slowly had to release some of them, because at some point it became urgent. I just felt like this book had to come out of me because it was blocking all the others I have inside. And I couldn't think about it one more time. And that's how I know that a project is also finished. When I cannot think about it, I want it out of my life. I know it's done. It needs to go.
Fair enough.
Those were some of the kind of blocks. Writer's block, you just get through it. You just need to show up and do it. And I'm telling myself that because I'm in the middle of a writer's mountain.
Mhm.
But you just got to do it. There's no other way.
For sure. And then Tarari's asked a few questions, which I'm going to merge. So she said, I like how this book teaches as much as it entertains. Can we expect the same approach in your subsequent books? And also, which authors have most influenced your writing? And I'm going to make a note of the last one because I definitely want to read more stuff that you recommend.
I don't know what to expect from it. I don't know. I don't know if my other books will do the thing that Havoc of Choice did. I pray that I just finish them. Really, at this point, I just want to get them done. But I also have so many stories. There's so many things that I want to speak about. There's so many voices that I want to let out. Not just mine, people, things, places I've been to that I think could benefit from storytelling. And I
Yeah.
think that will take as many formats as it needs to. I really don't want to, I want my readers to always just never see what's coming next. I used to say that there'll always be a dead body in my writing, but I'm just like, that means my books will always just not be joyful. And I want to write some joyful stories.
Yeah.
I don't know if I'll be writing about politics and elections anymore. I think it's important, and it can be entertaining, but it's at the end of the day, it's people's lives, and it's heavy. And there's a
Yeah.
lot of joy that I want to write about. So I can tell you the immediate next thing I write has to be joyful. I don't want people sobbing at the end of all of my books. But I think that I will always be driven to tell those stories that shift something. And there's lots to shift.
Sure, definitely. Emmanuel has asked, when is the next book coming? And also the next episode on your podcast, A Palace for the People.
And I want to ignore that first part of the question. Only answer the second one. We're just about to wrap up the scripting for the next season of the podcast. Thank you for that question. I'm glad to hear the podcast listener in the audience. The next book will come when it comes. I can say that right now I am there's many things in my life that are going amazingly well and many things that are not. And how much I write is one of the things that's not going well. It's top of mind. It's a thing I talk to my friends a lot about. They're sick of me complaining about how little I write. And I think it's at the end of the day, it's up to me. I have many things I want to do, and I have a full-time job, but writing is what I was put on this big round ball to do. So I will do. But these questions help. The pressure helps. So you can.
You know that there's people eagerly awaiting your next
yeah.
book. And then last question, and then I'll hand back over to Mrs. K. Is what character do you most see yourself in, if any of them, and kind of why, I guess?
So when I was writing the book, definitely Wanja, because we're closest age. Our backgrounds were the most similar, I guess, than anyone else's. That scene when she finds in the supermarket, I just don't really say, but when she's in the supermarket, that was probably one of the only things I actually extracted from my life.
Right.
Because I remember being in the supermarket and being so irritated at how poorly stocked the shelves were, and then checking myself for my privilege, being like, this is what you're stressed about, like the soap options. That little kind of battle with her access that I think I completely resonate with. As I get older, honestly, I don't know why Mrs. Muli becomes someone who I just
really?
yeah, I know. She's somebody who I really want to find empathy for, because she's the one who I had the least empathy for of all of the characters in the book.
Yeah,
But the older women now are more interesting to me, more because I'm looking to them as maybe as role models than anything
mm,
else.
for the
Yeah.
next stage. Makes sense. Well, thank you so, so much, Wanjiru. I've had the best time talking to you, honestly, and I'm sure our audience can relate from all the questions. We've had so many people say where they're kind of joining from, and also just saying how much they enjoyed the book or enjoyed hearing you speak. So thanks so much again for making the time. I'll hand back over to Mrs. K to kind of
Thank
round
you.
this. Of
Thank
course.
you. That was a really great conversation. I truly enjoyed myself.
I'm glad. Thank you so much again. Honestly, a wonderful conversation. Thank you so much to the audience for your incredible questions. Like, there's
Thank
so
you.
many in the chat. Oh, great. This cake.
Hi, I'm back. Thank you, Dabi. Very well done. I thoroughly enjoyed the conversation. Wanjiru, it's so great to have you here. You know, as I was listening to you, I just started thinking of my ties personally, and then work-wise with your beautiful country of Kenya. My children were briefly at St. Andrew's, Turi.
Oh, good.
Yes, we were Turi family, so we used to make those trips to Kenya ever so often, you know, and previously I'd had the privilege to come on holiday, went to Masai Mara, you
Oh,
know, experience just the beauty of the culture of Kenya. And yeah, I don't know if you recall, but I believe I met you in 2019 at the Sharjah. This is Coco. My name is Coco Kalango. I've not
This is
introduced
why you felt so familiar when you first turned on your video. I was just like, I thought maybe it's the promo or something, but yes.
Yeah,
Keep meeting
so
Georgia.
yeah, so I'm the founder of the Rainbow Book Club. Anyway, so I remember meeting you at the Sharjah Book Fair, and I didn't know that we'll be talking one day about your book. Very well done. And one of your characters is in Google. We've run out of time, so I won't go, but it just I just remembered when we hosted Ngugi at our book festival in Port Harcourt in 2009.
Oh,
Yes, we did. And then Binyavanga Wainana, who's also Kenyan. So
mhm.
he worked with us on the Africa 39 project, which we managed as part of the Port Harcourt World Book Capital programs in collaboration with Hay Festival. So yeah,
oh.
we do have some ties with Ken.
We do. And every single person you've mentioned is somebody, including Hay Festival, are people who are partners and friends. And Binyavanga, rest his soul, was such a dear friend. A big reason why I write is because he forced me. He's like, go and do it. He's one of the people who got so tired of me talking about how much I want to write and was like, go and write your book. So a lot of the things that I do have whispers of Binyavanga, pepper.
Yes, and we actually had him in Port Harcourt as well at one of our book festivals. So that's amazing. Well, we've run out of time, so I just want to thank you so much for making out the time to be with us here. Thank you.
For the invitation, and thank you so much for the great conversation,
Ex-
Dabi. All right. Thank you for the audience for coming through, and all the best for future book clubs. And this is a great platform. I'm so happy to have discovered it.
Thank you.
All right.
And
Bye.
well, before we close, just to say to our audience that we've come to the end of today's edition of Talking Books Africa. Next month, April, will be special because it would mark 1 year of the Talking Books Africa program. And our book of the month is My Watch by former Nigerian head of state and 2 times democratically elected president, Chief Olusegun Obasanjo. Now, we'll be discussing My Watch Volume 3, which is part of a trilogy of autobiographies he's written. So please follow us on our social media platforms. Just stay with us so you can have details because you don't want to miss this remarkable 1 year anniversary Talking Books Africa interview with Chief Olusegun Obasanjo. As usual, we'd encourage you to get a copy of the book, read it, and get ready to engage with us on Talking Books Africa. Well, we've come to the end of our program. Thank you very much for being with us, and have a lovely rest of the day.
To mark the 10th anniversary of Port Harcourt World Book Capital 2014, the Rainbow Book Club presents Talking Books Africa, a monthly virtual live conversation with authors. Connect with us on social media for interesting and enlightening interviews as we bring you Africa's stories. Rainbow Book Club, spreading the joy of reading since 2005.